The origin of the present Assam-Mizoram border issue can be traced back to colonial period. In fact, it is colonial legacy. The British colonial government demarcated both international and national boundary without taking historical factor into account, which left many boundary issues unsolved, both international and national. As we know, there are now ongoing problems in McMahon Line border issue between India and China. Likewise, in the Red Cliff border line between Pakistan and India also. Likewise, the many interstate boundary issue which Assam faced with many other northeastern states, with Mizoram, Meghalaya, Arunachal Pradesh, and Nagaland also could be traced to colonial legacy. And tribal people in hill areas were annexed one after another by the British colonialism with the signing of Treaty of Yandabo on 24th February 1826. And Garo Hills was the first hill territory to be annexed in 1822. And after that, Kasar was annexed in 1830, Khasi Hills in 1835, Naga Hills in 1866, Zantia Hills in 1883, Lusai Hills in 1891, and Northeast Frontier Tract was completely annexed in 1914. So, one significant aspect of tribal culture is maintenance of record, whether customary law, cultural practices, or territorial boundary by oral tradition, which was passed down from generation to generation through oral tradition. And through this oral tradition, the tribal maintain their territorial boundary, their custom, culture, and tradition, and the tribal really respect these oral tradition inheritance. But this has been often misunderstood by other communities in the plain area. And as tribal culture is traditionally linked with land, the British authority adopted and enforced some regulations for preservation and protection of tribal land, culture, and identity, particularly in undivided Assam or Northeast India at that time, like Regulation 10 of 1822, Bengal Eastern Frontier Regulation 1873, Scheduled District Act 1874, Garo Hills Act 1869, Chin Hills Regulation 1896, Government of India Act 1919, and Government of India Act of 1935. These acts were enforced mainly to preserve and protect the land, identity, custom, and tradition of the tribal people. And before the annexation of these tribal areas were neither part of India nor Assam, but they were demarcated in the province of Assam for administrative convenience of the colonial power. The same was the case with Lusai Hills. As we know, Lusai Hills was annexed in British Empire after the Chin-Lusai expedition of 1889-90, and Lusai Hills became part of British Empire since 1891. And after that, Chin Hills Regulation 1896 was jointly enforced in both Chin Hills and Lusai Hills, which were both Zhou-ethnic dominated territory. And Inner Line Regulation became effective in Lusai Hills from 1930. However, even before the annexation of Lusai Hills into British Empire, with the enforcement of this Inner Line Regulation or Bengal Eastern Frontier Regulation 1873 from November 1873, the present border dispute territory was already preserved and protected by this Inner Line Regulation. That's why strict instruction was issued that no British subject, no outsiders, or plain people should enter Lusai Hills. And in that order, the present disputed territory was already covered, and it was preserved for the hill people by Bengal Eastern Frontier Regulation or Inner Line Regulation. And that became effective from 1875. And over and above that, the present disputed territory was control, administer, and rule by the great Mizo chief Swakpuilala. Swakpuilala from 1780 to 1878. And that's why the British also respect the traditional land and the traditional territory of the Mizo people and Lusai Hills. That's why it was protected by the inner line regulation. That's why the British administration took up certain measures in order that this inner line reserve area and traditional territory of the Mizo people could be protected. That's why, as I've mentioned, when the British annexed this tribal territory one after another, proper boundary demarcation on the basis of historical fact and historical evidence was not done. That's why boundary dispute was inherited now. Boundary dispute was there between Mizoram and Assam, between Meghalaya and Assam, Arunachal Pradesh and Assam, then Nagaland and Assam. But the said territory was cultivated, occupied, and administered by the Mizo people even since pre-colonial era during the rules of the chief, Swakpuilala and other chiefs. And after that, it was preserved and protected by the inner line regulation. But as I've said, proper boundary demarcation on the basis of historical fact was not done by the colonial government, and that was also not done by the successive government of India even after independence. But one thing is very clear, that this area had been under Mizo chief since pre-colonial era, protected by inner line regulation. Then it was also administered by Mizo District Council, then by the successive Union Territory government and the state government. So this can be clearly known from the interview of Mr. Dukima from Thinglun village, which is located in the boundary area. That's why since District Council era, people of that area, they got permission from Mizo District Council, then they got passed from District Council, and after that from Revenue Department of the Union Territory government and from the state government. And one thing is very clear, that even in the area which is now administered by Assam, in this disputed territory, most of the occupants of that territory, they are mostly different tribes of the Zhou ethnic group. So this occupation of the land by different tribes of the Zhou ethnic group prove that the land naturally, historically, and originally belonged to Mizoram. And one thing, it is very clear that the first chief minister of Mizoram, Pu Tso-Chunga paddy field, is located in Zhou-Phai, which is now regarded as disputed territory. On the other hand, the land and the Jum field or cultivation area, which has been cultivated and occupied by Mizo people from generation to generation, is now claimed as disputed territory or disputed area. All this is due to not demarcating the boundary or the territory on the basis of historical fact. As I've said, as land is traditionally linked to culture in tribal society, due to that, even British government give importance to it. Due to that, it is recognized, it has been recognized by the inner line regulation. And that's why one thing which is very clear is that tribal people in general and Zhou ethnic tribes in particular never claim the thing which never belonged to them. So if the Zhou people and Mizo people can claim that the territory is theirs, then it is proof that there is certain historical evidence and historical authenticity. That's why now many things have been said with regard to this, that provisions of Northeastern Area Reorganization Act 1971 and Mizoram Accord of 1986. And they raised some doubts. But what is mentioned in Northeastern Area Reorganization Act 1971? It is clearly written here in point number 6. So what is written in the point number 6? Here it is mentioned that the territory which immediately before that they comprise in the Mizo District Council in Assam. That means if the territory which comprise Mizo District Council in Assam, I think that is very clear. Then what is mentioned in Mizoram Accord in 4.3 clause 1? Here it is mentioned that Union Territory of Mizoram shall comprise of the territory which is recognized in NIRA 1971 Act. So it is very clear here too. That's why now what caused the problem? Then why problem crop up? The problem crop up because the area which traditionally belonged to the Mizo people, which the Mizo people look after with love and care, has been disturbed from time to time by forest department and police force of the neighboring state. Then these forest department and police force of the neighboring state, they utilize illegal Bangladeshi immigrants who are hungry after land to occupy these traditional Mizo land. So that is a fact. As I've mentioned earlier, this unwanted boundary dispute is colonial legacy, which was not settled properly on historical evidence and on historical facts by colonial rulers. And the same mistake was inherited by the successive government of India. So, the present tension in the border is not between Assamese and Mizo people. In fact, it is not between Assam government and Mizoram government. But problem has been created and tension has been built up by some illegal Bangladeshi immigrants who are hungry after land, who try to occupy the land of the Mizo people. That's why this present border issue is purely colonial legacy, and which amicable solution can be arrived with objective observation on historical facts and historical evidence. The Mizo people will not surrender their territory, which was earlier owned, ruled, and administered by their chief. Therefore, any attempt to solve the boundary issue without historical evidence may not be lasting and may not bear fruit also. Therefore, let the ruling authority come to their senses and let this colonial legacy be erased by solving this border dispute with clear historical evidence and historical significance. So if historical evidence and historical record is not taken into account, the record from pre-British period, amicable solution to this boundary dispute may not be arrived. That's why it is not necessary, and it is also very unhealthy. Neighboring states always engage in this border dispute. That's why my wish is that let this issue be taken up and let history be taken into account. Historical evidence should be given importance and amicable solution be arrived. And let this problem be over. Thank you.